Welcome to Champions of the Lost Causes. I'm your host, Marvin Stockwell, and today I'm joined by Nupur Chaudhury, CEO of ioby. Nupur, thank you so much for being on Champions of the Lost Causes.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So glad to be able to talk to you. I should mention here at the outset that this is also part of the Champions of the Lost Causes podcast summer road trip, which I'm crowdfunding for on guess where?
ioby,
right? Just like I did last summer. So I am a fan of ioby, and it's great to be able to talk to the head person in charge of ioby. I've been a fan of the platform for years, and you took over as CEO about 11 months ago?
10 months ago, yeah. It's flown by, but yeah, it's been less than a year. Totally.
Wow. Here at the outset, for those who don't know, could you just kind of back up a step and tell people what ioby is?
Sure, most definitely. So ioby stands for In Our Backyards. It is a 16-year-old neighborhood crowdfunding platform. And when I say that, I like to talk about the fact that it really is the platform for neighborhood leaders across the country to step into their power, to step into their leadership, and really take an idea that they have that might be kind of in the back of their mind or kind of deep in their heart and turn that into action. We have a combination of the traditional crowdfunding that you see on other crowdfunding platforms, but what makes us so special is that we actually have community coaches who are organizers across the country who work with you hand in hand to support your idea and turn it from idea to action.
Wow. No, as you were speaking, I realized one of my best episodes from last summer's podcast road trip was a suggestion of my fundraising coach. Wasn't inside the bounds of his job description necessarily, but as I was talking about the show, he goes, you really need to talk to the people in Minneapolis that are working to save the East Phillips Depot. And indeed, that we did. So ioby is a crowdfunding platform with this great kind of a community ethos that just seems to from an ethos perspective, just fits where I was coming from. Most listeners of this podcast know that my kind of primary cause that sent me down this path was championing the cause of the Mid-South Coliseum. And as I was sharing with you before we went on, had we not had ioby to crowdfund that crucial $7,200 in the early going, I'm not sure the Coliseum would still be standing. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really wonderful to always hear about different stories across the country of small, medium, or large amounts of money that folks are able to crowdfund. You know, I think the average donation or the average project doesn't usually cost a lot. And what's really exciting about ioby and what's really, really important about ioby is that it really stands at this nexus of community change and action, but also really thinking about gathering resources together, whether it's dollars, whether it's volunteers, whether it's alternative ideas that can come together to bring a stronger amount of change in a place or space. I love hearing about that because as someone who's a community organizer myself, this work takes time. Sure. There's not always a straight path, and it's not always just one person that does the work. It's actually a group of folks that come together to create that change. And so it's amazing that ioby is able to really build that infrastructure and kind of be that backbone around so much of the change that happens across the country. Yeah.
No, as you say that, I realize it's been my own experience on the Coliseum cause as well, but everybody that I've ever, I don't think I've ever interviewed any one person that said that they championed the cause by themselves. Right. It's almost like that bat signal hits the sky and the bat women and bat men respond. And there's certain people who are wired to care about a given issue. And when the distress signal hits or the opportunity signal hits, whichever, people respond. So our group of people who champion the cause of the Coliseum kind of just materialized out of the ether, and we were also working against a demolition threat that all of a sudden went from no one was talking about it to it's in the front of the newspaper. And so I think one of the greatest things about ioby is it gives people the ability to respond quickly, whereas your traditional nonprofit model is like, well, let's see what grants are out there and like let's get in sync with the grant cycle. And sometimes folks can't wait for the sync up with the grant cycle.
Yes, and as a former program officer, I know very, very intimately the entire funding cycle, what happens, kind of all of the hoops that you have to jump through, all of the paperwork that you need to fill out. And usually what happens is that when you're building that relationship with a program officer or a foundation, even a community foundation, it takes time. And some of the projects that folks utilize ioby for are ones that are really, really important projects that don't have that type of time. But I'll take 2 steps back and say, you were sharing that, sometimes these projects are almost like a bat signal and folks materialize. And I would actually challenge you, because I actually think that most of the folks that support each other on that platform around the change actually also have an idea or a desire to have a purpose for change, but they don't necessarily have that direction. And so having that bat signal in that place, I don't think it's just that people materialize. I think people are waiting for it. And I think people really want that direction from their neighbors, from their friends, from folks that they're in relationship with to the left and the right, to say, where are we moving? Where are we going towards? Who do we want to be as a community, as a block, as a neighborhood, right? And it just really takes one person to maybe start with an idea, but often there are a lot of people that are like, well, what about this? And what about this? And I'm sure that was your experience, right? It
really was.
After this many years working on the Coliseum.
Yeah, I mean, literally, it was about 3 of us for about the first 2 weeks. We were just like, at first I said, I'm a PR guy. Mike, you got the fire in the gut. I'll help you with a guest editorial for the newspaper. Yeah. That was going to be my good deed, and then I would be done, right?
Yeah.
And then he turned. That, of course, really caught on, and then somebody circulated a petition. Again, like multiple things happen. I think it's a matter of you're giving people the opportunity to express an inborn desire to make the world a better place or make their community stronger. I just think when you look at the concept of championing a cause and say, why do people do it? You can't explain it with the traditional success and reward metrics. They just don't make sense, and it's too pat of an answer to say it's altruism. Oh, people want to give back. Why? Why do they want to give back? But I think what ioby has enabled, not only fostered but also enabled and made possible, is those you've given people the tools to come together and affect change.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. And I'll say that, many times folks know about us because of the crowdfunding platform, but there are many other things that we do. I mentioned the coaching, but there's also another piece around the fiscal sponsorship that we offer, right? So folks who are unincorporated groups, who may not necessarily be a nonprofit or a organization in the eyes of the IRS designation, but have an idea and know what needs to happen in their communities, we're able to support them in that type of way. I would like to think that a lot of what ioby does is really take care of a lot of the back end support and the back end work so that leaders like yourself and folks across the country can step into their own vision for change and action in their own neighborhoods, right? And so, as someone who's been a program officer, as someone who's worked for government, as someone who's been a community organizer, you really see things that happen and you want to be able to make that change. And you don't want to get bogged down in all of the nitty gritty of, well, how do we report on all these things? Or can we create an entire logic model? Or sometimes you just know because you're the expert at your own neighborhood, right? You're the expert of your own city. Why? Because you grew up there, you're from there, you live there, right? You're in conversation with your neighbors on a daily basis. And you probably know much better than any program officer. As someone who was a program officer, you know better than anyone what needs to happen. And so the opportunity to be that infrastructure and to be that support and to say, together we can build this change, right? And we have these different roles and we can build this together is actually a really beautiful space to be in that I'm very, very privileged to be in on a daily basis.
I can tell by the look on your face that you love your job.
Yeah, I do.
It's just deeply rewarding work, I have to imagine. However, I understand that what you all do is take the nitty-gritty groundwork kind of off the plates of the civic leaders that need to take action, and you remove that impediment. But I also think you all must do a really great job at hiring, because the people that I've encountered on your staff heart-wise are wired like I'm wired.
Yeah.
That's intentional, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, most of the folks on our staff, they're passionate about change themselves, right?
Exactly.
So, you know, we have folks on our team that are avid gardeners. They're very, very committed to birds and the birding community in their own place and space. They're born and raised in their neighborhoods, and they want to be support for their neighbors to their left and right, whatever that looks like, right? There are people who are artists and playwrights that believe that art can change the world. And then we have folks who are really thinking about technology in different ways as a tool for change, right? The passion that I see in the team is amazing because they both understand what needs to happen when we come together to create change, but also that they're experts in their own place and space and their own expertise, right? And so being able to have that opportunity to make space for that is actually a really wonderful thing as well.
Wow. I just from a fit perspective, you must, well, I don't know how you hire the right people, but all I can say is that I've encountered lots of people that work at ioby at all sorts of levels. And not only are they really helpful, but they're also very interested in what I'm doing, and they have great ideas. Like,
I mean, we really are. We actually do believe that all of the projects across the country, I think to date it's like 3,700 projects. These are projects that can change the world and are changing the world.
100%.
And that we need them. And so for that, we understand what it means to be able to support folks in that vision and in that journey, and that folks need that support, but also that like we need them to do that work as well, right? So understanding people's roles in that is really, really important. I think like on a larger scale, it's thinking about the world and the ecosystem, right? And thinking about mutuality, but also thinking about solidarity, right? So not everyone is going to be an ioby leader. Someone may be an ioby donor, right? Supporting through $5 around the project, whether it's a coliseum, whether it's a community garden. There are people who are kind of the amplifiers and the cheerleaders who are telling other folks about it. There's a role for everyone in these projects and in the change that needs to happen. And I think there's no better place to see that than the ioby staff.
as a PR pro with my own publicity practice, I'm proud to be partnering with my friends at Muckrack, an all-in-one platform that helps me build rapport with journalists and land timely media coverage. Not only does Muckrack give me the tools I need, they actively work with PR pros and journalists to build community in ways that add value to our work. If you want more information about Muckrack, visit muckrack.com. Yeah. Let's take a step back here and talk a bit about your own path to ioby. Before you were the CEO, you were first a project leader. Can you tell us a little bit about your projects and?
So I'll go even further back,
okay.
And I will tell you a little bit about like my own background and my own upbringing to give you a little bit of sense of who I am and kind of why I stepped into this role and why I'm so excited about being a part of ioby every day.
Sure.
So, I had mentioned before, both of my parents are from India. I'll say that my dad is actually from what we call pre-partition India. So this was before the British actually they were a part of India, but they didn't necessarily divide India into what is now India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. So my father was born in what is now Bangladesh. And if you know anything about Indian history, the way that the British partitioned India and broke up India was this traditional divide and conquer, right? And so they really did the work of ensuring that Hindus and Muslims saw themselves as different people and different groups. Now, my father grew up in a small village in what's now Bangladesh, and he always talks about his village as a place where Hindus and Muslims lived together. There was no difference. They were all part of the same village. And he didn't even know who was Hindu and who was Muslim. They were just part of his community. And he remembers one of his first memories was actually during the Act of Partition. And so if you know anything about Indian history, the Act of Partition was one of the largest, bloodiest revolts in which the British actually worked to say India, or what's now India, will be Hindu, and what is now Bangladesh will be Muslim. So all the Muslims who were in India had to escape to what's now Bangladesh and Pakistan, and all the Hindus had to go from what is now Pakistan and Bangladesh into India. It was the largest forced migration at that time in the shortest amount of time. And my father grew up as a Hindu. And he was in what is now being called Muslim land. His first memory was hiding in the basement of a neighbor's house because he was really young. He was 5 years old. And the family was a Muslim family. For him, he really didn't understand any difference between what it meant to be this person or that person. And ultimately what happened was that he was actually forcefully displaced into what is now India. I share that story because so much of that origin of really understanding who we are as people before labels is really a way in which I was raised as a person, right? But I think it also kind of gets to a little bit around how there are other labels or other definitions or kind of other categories that people place us in. But when we think about our place in space and how we're united around place and space, that's like a very, very important thing. So I was raised in a household with a dad who was a refugee because of larger forces at play, right? And he came to, before coming to the US, he came to England and was a physician there, was doing his residency there, and was amongst other Indians who also were in England at that time. At that time, England had a doctor shortage, and so there were a lot of doctors that came from India to England. And he looked to the left and right and saw folks that looked like him and realized that in of all places, the cafeteria that they ate didn't have anything that really represented them as people. And so he created an organizing campaign to actually get an Indian condiment, which the English term is pickle, but it actually is called achar. It's a spicy preserved vegetable that's served in a jar that any South Asian will kind of have with their meal. And he created an entire organizing campaign to ensure that they had pickle at every table in the cafeteria.
Wow.
He understood what it meant to be a person and in contribution in a space and place, and said we could actually come together and create change over something as small as a condiment, right? So it's very, very random, but I wanted to share those two stories of my dad and kind of like how he grew up and what that looked like. I'll go even further back and say that, you know, my grandfather was a part of the liberation movement in South Asia. So he actually dropped out of school, protested against the British, and really believed in liberation and self-determination for South Asians. And so, you know, stories small and big, like organizing for a condiment, or something much bigger, like organizing for freedom and liberation, are things that kind of run through my blood. And so I kind of grew up with this idea that I can be an agent for change. And it can be very small and it can be very big, but it's important and it matters. So, you know, I grew up
What a blessing to have that as your heritage.
Yes.
Wow, that's
and I
cool.
think it's something that helps me understand as we think about ioby leaders, as we think about kind of change that happens in this country, that we come from a legacy of change makers, right? And that the change happens both before us and it will happen beyond and after us. And so if we're able to kind of move this change along this continuum, that we've done our work, right?
Right.
So that's like a lot of kind of what fuels me and encourages me. I grew up in a suburb of Boston on a very busy street, and I actually grew up right across from a park. And I could never actually walk to the park because the street was so busy. My parents were immigrants, and they worked at all hours, and the biggest rule that I had was that I was not allowed to leave the house because they were working late. And they didn't feel like the street was safe enough for my brother and myself to go across the street to the park and play. I think about ioby a lot because I think about what it would look like to have had an organization like ioby, to have a young person like myself to say, I think there actually needs to be a crosswalk here. And I actually want to spend a weekend creating a pop-up crosswalk to see if this could work. And I actually want to understand whether or not government would actually solidify and operationalize this crosswalk so that I could walk across the street to the park. Right. So these are all kinds of things that come to mind when you ask me about kind of my own background and my history. I'll tell you kind of like the more traditional things is that because of my heritage and because of what I've shared with you, I'm trained in both urban planning and public health. And so I look at how space and place affects the health of communities, affects the health of cities, and affects the health of nations, right? I believe strongly in the fact that if we are able to define our own space and place, and if we're able to stay in place where we are, right? Not like my dad who was forcefully displaced, not like many people who are forcefully displaced because of so many housing policies or gentrification initiatives. We are stronger and we are more whole. And so part of the work that I do is to really encourage and ensure throughout the life of my career, how can folks both stay in place where they are if they choose to and not be forcefully displaced, but also how do they self-determine their own future? How do they get to say, this is what I want it to look like? Because we know both they're the experts, right? But also that there's amazing health outcomes when you're able to self-determine your own future. Right? Both social cohesion, but also control of your own space and place. There's numerous studies that have shown all of this. So, these are all things that have kind of got me down this path of kind of exploring health, space, place, and people. And initially, when I graduated from college, I went to India, right? I went back to where my parents are from, and I worked and did a lot of organizing in villages across India. And it was actually villagers that told me to come back to the US. And they said, you're Indian, but you're also American. And there's work that needs to happen here, but there's also work that needs to happen there. And you need to acknowledge both sides of yourself, both your Indian heritage and your American upbringing to create a whole. And so that's kind of what brought me back to the US in my early 20s. And since then, I've worked in many, many different spaces and places. So I've been an organizer and I've done a lot of work, and I continue to do work in the public housing community of Brownsville, Brooklyn, not too far from here. And it was there that I actually first found out about ioby. When I was working there, I was working for a larger organization, right? So an established nonprofit that had satellite offices in different places. I was funded by a grant from the New York State Department of Health, so a large government grant, so fully funded. And I knew very deeply, because of my background and because of my own heritage, why it's important to talk to people and listen to people and understand what needs to happen. And I was in conversation with leaders across Brownsville. And what I saw was that whenever I said something to government, to funders, to other people, they would listen to me because I had 2 masters, because I looked a certain way. But whenever someone from Brownsville said something, they never listened to them. And so from that, I started thinking about what are the ways that we can build bridges around folks who have money and resources and folks who have the actual expertise. And while I was doing that work, it was a active transportation master plan across Brownsville. ioby showed up. And what they said was, we see you and we believe in your vision. What can we do to help? Because of that, I am always indebted to ioby, because ioby is one of the few organizations that actually trusts leaders across the ground. And I saw it happen, right? I was just one person, like straight out of grad school in my 20s, trying to get Department of Transportation or Department of Health or the state, get them to listen to people who actually knew what needed to happen on the ground, right? And it was so hard. But ioby, as an intermediary between larger sources of funding and being on the ground with community, could actually create that bridge and say, we trust you, we believe in you, we want to help. How can we do that? You tell us, and you lead the way, and we will make that happen. And from that, so many projects stemmed in Brownsville, right? One of the most, the best project that, I'm still kind of in touch with, and I consider them my mentors, are Dion Grayman and Sheila Gordon from We Run Brownsville. And they're 2 women who grew up in Brownsville, who knew that there was a need, right? Similar to the Coliseum. There was a need to create space for Black women to come together and create change. And at that time, it was just a running group, getting together, walking together, being fit together. But ultimately, they were able to build through the platform a strong infrastructure around their work, but also they were able to gain credibility with local government and with other folks. And bit by bit, they've been able to do amazing work. They are folks who are behind the renovation of Betsy Head Park in Brownsville, Brooklyn. So they were a huge advocate for that, and it's like millions of dollars invested. During COVID, they were the ones that really understood that mental health was a huge issue in Brownsville. And they were able to actually organize folks and really make sure that the mental health of women in Brownsville were strong and robust during a really, really difficult time. So it was this thing that started really small that was like, we just want folks to come together and walk together and be fit together, and has really blossomed into all these different things. And it was because of ioby.
Right.
Saying, I believe you. I trust you. What can we do to help?
It is so basic, but I really do feel like it's not that there weren't other crowdfunding platforms out there, but I just know that ioby felt like the one that was a good missional fit, and I felt like I was in communication with people who were like me, who understood me. And if you've looked in preparing for this podcast road trip, I also your team was kind enough to send me a good 25 possible ioby project leaders to potentially interview.
I'm surprised they didn't send you more, because we have so many leaders that are amazing.
Oh, well, no, they sent me ioby project leaders in the cities that were on my trip route.
Got it.
So yeah, but so I've looked at a lot of projects, and really it's so far flung. It can be so many things. And that's the thing, it's just like championing a cause at the outset, you think of it in these big bombastic terms, but then you meet a Michelle Brown in Oakland, California, who's leveraging what she knows about risky play to help neurodivergent kids stay out of trouble and get better grades, and it's having a real impact in those students' lives. And so, the longer I do the podcast, the more I realize that there is just a world full of people championing causes, big and small, and I think. I'm actually, maybe big and small aren't even the right words, because I think they're all big. Yeah. They're all incredibly important to that to that one specific neurodivergent teen in Oakland who got set on a better path. Yeah. And what we're learning about neurodivergence is like it's all a gift. It's just that society is not set up to accept. I would argue that it's growing more accepting. So I just think that made an impact in that one person's life, or those several dozen kids at this point. Yeah. So I just feel like the longer I do this podcast, the more I realize there is so much incremental, breathe in, breathe out work of repairing the world and healing, and not only just fixing what's broken, but standing up for matters of justice and speaking out and saying, we don't want to just solve to repair the damage. We want you to stop the damage. We want you to stop damaging people in a given topic.
Yeah,
or whatever.
I mean, also in that neighborhood healing can happen in a lot of different ways.
That's
so
right.
There are very, very traditional models that we have, both in this country and in other countries, where it's you vote for an elected official, you vote for the person that you believe will represent you in office, that will, align a budget according to priorities, pass policies, et cetera, et cetera. And this idea of individual leaders stepping into their power through important projects that may not necessarily be large in scale, but important in the work, is essential because it allows for an alternative source of change, right? I think what I'm seeing more and more amongst the last 10 months that I've been at ioby, but also over the last 20 years that I've done this work, is that we are all that we have, right? And we need to work together. And so what does that look like? We can continue to do the work in the traditional models, right? We can continue to show up and vote. We can continue to advocate for change, but we can also do some of the work ourselves.
That's right.
And if we start thinking about it in that way, that we are all that we have, but also all that we need is already here, it changes the trajectory and it changes the mindset in a completely different way. I think it's really, really important now more than ever to really understand that it is not just us and government or us and an institution, but it is us together, right? And I think ioby, like, it gives a space to actually put that into action, right? So, I think about this one project in Ohio. As someone who's a kid of immigrants, there's a project that has come up, and they've done multiple rounds of funding, like you, that has actually worked towards changing this physical space to reflect the diversity of its population. So there are a good number of Pakistani immigrants in Ohio, and they wanted a space that they could actually teach folks about their heritage and their background. And so they've gone back to ioby again and again to crowdfund for multiple rounds around this. But what it means is that folks are able to also assert themselves spatially and say, we're here and we matter, right? And we're a part of this community as well.
Right.
And I think about so much, you talk about the kids who are really experiencing risky play and kind of why that's important for them. To be honest, I selfishly think about myself and how my life would have been different if I had seen a garden that reflected my own heritage spatially in public, right? Would I have stepped into my leadership sooner in a different way? I don't know. But being a part of that change and allowing that to bubble up to the surface and facilitate that to happen is something that's really, really powerful and a real privilege in this lifetime to steward and facilitate.
Yeah. I had, when I was 9 years old, I was working downtown. My family opened up the very first frozen yogurt place in Memphis, the Yogery at Court Square. It wasn't a big operation. It never made a whole lot of money, but it provided a good job for my dad when he got laid off from his architecture firm. My uncle a good job when he got laid off from the brewery. One day we were downtown Memphis, and in 1979, Memphis was downtown was all boarded up. And I remember asking my mom. It finally dawned on me, what is going on here? Like, I finally saw it, and for the first time, really. And I said, Mom, what was this place? She said, well, son, I know it doesn't look like a lot right now, but this is our downtown. And I read an article a few weeks ago that said that one day it's going to come back. And I remember that thought animated me. Yeah. And now in that was not necessarily any agency, but I do think that was a formative little early inkling that things could regenerate a city. And now, as an adult, I know why downtown Memphis hollowed out. It hollowed out right after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And it was artists that kept it alive because they needed a cheap place to live. So much of the really cool infrastructure and cool old buildings of downtown still stand because of that flight and because artists kind of lived there cheaply. And then little by little it came back, and imperfectly, but I know that was a real genesis moment for me in optimism for cities, optimism for comebacks. It was a formative experience in my own life as an optimist. And you looking back and saying, like, I wish I have had the agency or the tools to be told I could design a crosswalk, and now we have the benefit of, like, this is commonplace, that people are taking these tools into their own hands and making positive civic change. I absolutely agree with you. I think I think it's a false binary, kind of like, well, we can, your opportunity to change is your vote, not taking anything away from the vote. Voting is very important. But it's like in the interim, there's like it's actually way more important, and it's way more, I don't know, personally empowering to be able, whatever change you enact, if you help to enact that change and then you see it make a difference, that empowers you all the more. So I have to believe that plays a role in ioby leaders coming back time and time again to take their projects further. I mean, I interviewed Kim Yim in East Harlem just this morning, and she has come back to ioby time and time again. Most recently, the city of New York cut their composting schedules, so she went and crowdfunded for a new hot box to do better composting of food waste. It's like, so she's got the tool, she's got the partner, and now she's got that gear to turn to whenever there's a new need.
The idea and the belief that things can be different, that is the most important thing. And along with that, the idea and the belief that you can be a part of that difference is what's really, really important. Mm-hmm. So when you think about kind of the ecosystem of change, right? And I was talking before about kind of the traditional models, right? So, I mean, I come from a family of physicians, right? And they always are upset, they're doctors, and they're upset because I only went to lowly public health school, right? So they see a problem and they fix it, right? And I think about the population, I think about how to prevent it in the future. But often there are many analogies that we utilize around the human body and things like that. And so when you think about kind of those traditional models, you can think about it as the bones. But you need to have the tendons, you need to have the muscles, you need to have all of the veins, you need to have the skin that pulls it all together.
I love this analogy.
And those are all the things that create the change that we need, right? It's not just the bones, because then a bone is just a pile of bones, right? Nobody needs that. Mm-hmm. You need all of the things that bring it together. And then don't get me started on like the brain, the nerves, all those types of things. But yes, I mean, you need to have that ecosystem of change at multiple levels happening simultaneously to be able to really create that change. So yeah, it's just, I mean, I could talk about this all day. It really is, when you think about someone like Kim, when you think about someone like Dion, when you think about, another person that is near and dear to my heart, is someone by the name of Cordine Lewis Allen, who was a young person from Brownsville, who was from the design and architecture field, right? He went to school for that, and realized that in the Brownsville community, there really wasn't anything for young people like him to kind of go into those fields. And he was someone who was kind of a one and only, right? He made it out. He was able to go to Harvard Design School, but he came back to Brownsville because he said, I want to make this place better. And I actually want to change the trajectory of young people so that they have the options that most of them didn't really have. So he created this organization called Made in Brownsville, which is now the Youth Design Center, and utilized ioby to crowdfund.
Yeah.
10 years later, I think they celebrated its 10-year, maybe 11-year anniversary. It's evolved over the years, but the core of it is the same. Knowing where I'm from, how do I make this place better, right?
Wow.
And so if we're able to kind of think about that. Now, Q did not know all of the pieces of what it meant to kind of build an organization or build a collective or build an initiative. He went on his way to become a 501c3 and build that. Now he's an Echoing Green Fellow, has been, named in numerous magazines around the work that he's done. But it started with an idea, maybe not sure of whether or not it should become a 501c3, but stepped on ioby's platform to kind of see what he could do around that. Right? There's hundreds and thousands of those stories, right? And some of them do take that trajectory of becoming their own 501c3. Some of them don't. Some of them want to be a collective, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a privilege to be able to say, do what you do best and we'll take care of the rest.
Right? Yeah. As you were talking, I realized I think one of the greatest gifts that ioby gives people is the ability to act immediately, because not to be too Carl Jung here, but the higher aspirational self wants a different thing than our ego. The ego knows the known knowns and it knows the safe plays, and we need our ego. We need to be kept safe. We need to follow certain rules that keep us safe. But I feel like those moments of like, oh, by golly, somebody oughta, that's our higher aspirational self speaking, saying you ought to do this. And I feel like if you hesitate and start to cross-examine your own better energies, sometimes you can smother a good idea that you should have taken action on.
Totally.
But my point is, ioby's right there, standing by at the ready to say, you want to beta test that idea? Because there's really no downside. You know, I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen is a question you could ask, and you go like, why shouldn't I try this? And then the example you cite is a great one, because yes, it then did become a nonprofit. The Coliseum Coalition became its own nonprofit. Yeah. We fundraised in other ways, and recently we've given rise to a Coliseum Conservancy. It's a different nonprofit with a different kind of complementary mission, and together we're working. It's different skill sets. But my point is, you can build out the infrastructure of officialdom in time if it serves you.
Sure.
But you don't need that to take action. That is so awesome.
Traction and momentum. Those are the two things that you kind of need to kind of bring it together. So being able to grab onto that and being able to support that is something that we really enjoy doing.
Wow. So we've talked a good bit about our mutual love for ioby and the great platform it is, a platform that you said before we even started rolling, that you inherited, that you're stewarding, and you're magnanimous to kind of like tip the hat to your predecessors who formed ioby. But I want to talk a little bit about what you've been up to in the last 10 months and what is coming. This is a leading way to ask this question. What is coming next for ioby? Because we were talking, but there's something really exciting, and I don't want to rob any of it from you.
That is a leading question, but that's okay. I don't mind answering it. So what's next for ioby is next, right? So later this month in July, we are uncovering what's the word?
Debuting,
that's it. We're debuting a completely new platform called ioby Next.
Oh, wow.
And this is a platform that has been built off of 15 years of feedback from folks like yourself, feedback from our community coaches and our strategists to say, wouldn't it be interesting if we could do X, Y, and Z? And a real understanding of the technology that is the field today, right? The amazing founders of ioby built the platform before there even was the word crowdfunding. Mm-hmm. They built the platform before there was really any social media. And so the technology that was utilized over the last 15 years is quite old, right? So I always liken it to technological duct tape, right? Just kind of trying to keep everything together on an old model. About, I would say probably 4 years ago, my predecessors made the right decision to start hiring tech folks in-house at ioby. And to really start taking a look at how we could build a platform that really respected the vision of the ioby leaders across the country. And so it's been a very long process. And so over the past year, what we've been doing is really bringing this product to the finish line. So for folks who might be a fan or a friend of ioby, they will probably log into our website at the end of July, beginning of August, and be like, oh, okay, so the website looks kind of nicer. Seems like there's some different fonts or things like that. But the magic actually is on the back end for ioby leaders. Folks who actually submit their idea and folks who actually use the platform to crowdfund, they'll see increased efficiency. They'll be able to understand how to get from idea to action much faster. And they'll be able to spend time with the coaches in conversation around the project and less around, oh, this tech platform broke, how do we fix it? Or let me kind of restart it on the back end. So we're really excited about this because what it means is that our coaches can do what they do best, which is coach folks across the country, and leaders can get what they need most: conversation, relationships, and a real person in their corner that's able to help them take their idea and turn it into action.
Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like that's already to a degree what ioby has done, but I will be the first to admit that like the tech interface is not with anything. It's not a complaint against ioby, but the tech interface, I'm always kind of braced to feel like I'm going to get it wrong. So anything that makes that more user friendly is welcome.
Most definitely. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and like, you now understand a little bit of my background. Like, I'm an organizer who has a background in urban planning and public health. I am not a tech person, right? So for me, when I want to create change, I don't want to be stuck on a website to do this, right? I want to actually create the change. And so utilizing our platform as a tool for change, but really making sure that it kind of stays in its corner as kind of that tool and not necessarily something that encompasses the entire experience is something that was really, really important to me, because you really can't change the world behind a computer. It really happens in spaces and places. And
Right.
so what are the ways in which we can make this experience easy, joyful, and really, really seamless so that folks can really get back to the work that they need to do, which is being in conversation with folks and really thinking about what needs to happen in their backyards.
Mm-hmm. Now, ioby is a platform that is kind of somewhat cause agnostic. You can kind of use ioby as a crowdfunding platform to affect all sorts of different ends. But are there issues that are bubbling to the top based on the way the world is changing and our increasingly polarized society? There's always that. I mean, yes, you want to be a platform to have the leaders see the thing and do the thing, but as a leader with an organization like ioby, are there issues that rise to the top where you as an organization, both in terms of what you encourage or what you seek out, are there some overarching objectives and things you want to address as an organization?
Yeah, so I'll say that one of the things that I'm really excited about stepping into this role is the opportunity to start thinking about tracking and understanding all of those trends across the country, right? So I think ioby's done a really good job of really being there for leaders across the country, and has an opportunity to actually amplify a lot of the things that they're seeing on the platform. So I'm very excited about that. I think I have grand visions of really thinking about a data and research team that can actually support some of the work and aggregate some of this information to understand not only where are the places that things are happening, but what are the things that are happening and why, right? In general, what I see and what's really cool, I will say this, is that, our team, because we're across the country, we utilize Slack as a communication tool. And one of our channels actually is the channel where every time a new idea gets submitted, it shows up on the Slack channel. So throughout the day and night, right? Because I know that there are like many night owls. I get pings of ideas that are happening across the country that are saying,
wow,
this is really important and I want to make this happen. Some trends that I've seen is a lot of work around and a lot of desire to create change around improving mental health, increasing connectedness with each other, and not necessarily around a specific cause, just actually being in community with each other. I've seen a lot recently around the opportunity to get folks involved in arts and culture activities. And I wonder if some of that is because of the fact that so much of that funding is cut and is kind of going down in budgets across the country. And then we always, and I think this is because of the origins of ioby being a really strong advocate for environmental change and kind of really thinking about how folks can get involved in the climate movement. We always see folks who are really interested in improving space and place through community gardens, through walking trails, through thinking about food and food access, right? So these are kind of like some of the mainstays. And also like we see quite a few projects around puppies and kittens, animals and animal health, right? These are things that matter to folks, right? And these are things that kind of bring folks together. So there's one that's really interesting that's around taking care of the community of cats in a neighborhood, right?
Wow. Yeah, sure.
right?
I can see it.
Important work. And there's like a space for everyone at ioby. I think a lot about what it looks like to actually aggregate a lot of this, but also what it looks like to actually build connections across neighborhoods and across cities. And I think that's something that I'm really excited to build on. I think in the past there have been connections or cohesion on a place-based level, right? So either in Memphis or in Detroit. We have an initiative in Northwest Arkansas right now, or in Pittsburgh. But I also think there's a lot of power in really thinking about trends across the nation and how we can connect them with each other to build stronger infrastructure around that. So what would it look like to have a convening of ioby leaders who are really interested in arts and culture? And what happens if we bring them together? Right? How can they support each other? Going back to this idea that we're all that we have, right? How can we support each other in this lens of mutuality? What would it look like if we actually had all of the leaders that thought about health and mental health across the country?
Right.
Can they support each other in the work? Because the work is important and inspiring, but sometimes it's also really lonely, right?
Sure.
So can we support each other around some of that? These are some things that I'm excited about. Yeah.
I'm excited about that too, because I have noticed the longer I do the podcast, the more I realize that certain causes are of a particular type. And environmentalism is a great big basket. Adaptive reuse is another kind of subfolder, so to speak. And there have to be lessons learned in all those. Like last year's podcast road trip, I actually ended up interviewing the guy who rehabbed Kemper Arena. It was going to be bulldozed. And I was actually, it was because of my Coliseum work, there was a consultant, and he mentioned a couple of these guys, and I said, I'm about to head out on a podcast road trip. Can you connect me? So I interviewed the guy who saved and then restored Kemper Arena and turned it into Hy-Vee Arena. And then there was the same conversation led me to interview the owner of the Tulsa Oilers hockey team, he got into hockey, and then he ended up he worked for 30 years did pretty well for himself, but he finally, it was because of his daughter's youth hockey that got him interested in hockey. He wasn't even a sports guy. And he gets into hockey because of his daughter. Then he ends up loving hockey so much that he ends up running the San Jose Sharks youth hockey program. And then he decides, I've made enough, I've done well for myself, I'm going to buy a minor league hockey team. And he moves to Tulsa. And he's looking for a place to build a facility, and construction costs are through the roof. And kind of as an afterthought, a half joke, somebody says, there's an old empty Macy's in this dying mall on the edge of town. Would you want to kick the tires of that? That's where they built the Tulsa Oilers practice facility, and it's restored the life of the mall.
I love it.
But so it's because of my own activism around arenas that led me to talking to these people. And so adaptive reuse, just because I have a personal interest, ends up being a topic that I cover.
Sure.
But as Steve Fouch is the guy who did Kemper Arena, as he was touring me through and explaining the processes that led them to talking to the community, figuring out what people want, finding the right structural engineers to do the stuff, they were some of the same steps that we'd gone through. So to your point, I mean, if you can connect leaders that are steeping on some of the same things and encountering the same problems, I got to believe that's going to help them plan for the future, fast forward their learning.
Most definitely fast forward their learning, but also understand that they're not the one and only, right? That they're actually part of this larger movement around change. And I think that when we think about where we are kind of in this country, in this moment, to know that you aren't alone in this, and that there actually are not only all of the ioby staff that are kind of, the wind at your back to really help you step into your leadership, but that actually, when you look to your left and your right, it's not just in your own neighborhood, that it's actually across the nation, is really, really powerful. As someone who's been in the community development work, social justice work, it's hard. It's really hard. And there are some days where you feel like, are we doing anything? Does it even matter? Right? And so to have someone...
You can get discouraged.
You get discouraged. And to have someone who's yes, down the street, but also someone who might be in another city saying, I'm actually feeling the same thing. Here's actually something that really helped me. And to have that network is really, really important. Yeah.
I'm so glad that you're undertaking that work, because this is something that I've identified as a need. It's like when people champion a cause, yes, they've got the camaraderie with the people with whom they're doing it. But I do think you're told a lot. You guys are crazy. That's never going to happen. The Coliseum is as good as demolished. Like, I actually literally had somebody pull me aside and be like, Marvin, come over here, man. Come over here, man. Look, I love it, dude. You're a homer for this city and everything. It's great. But like, there's some powerful people in this city that you are standing in the way of, and like, they're going to. This is the bookend of the powerful person, Robert Lipscomb. We were told this is the bookend of his whole career. This is what he wants to do. You're a fool to stand in his way, and you're going to get hurt, and you don't want to throw all that away. I was told, they said, look, Marvin, you're kind of an up and coming PR guy here in the nonprofit community. You're traveling in the right circles, which I didn't think of myself as that, but it's like kind, I guess. But they're basically saying, don't chuck away your social standing, tilting at windmills for some cause. You're not going to win. And here we are 10 years later, and the Coliseum still has survived 2 demolition threats. But my point is, the voices in your ears are one telling you you are isolated, you are strange, you are countercultural, and you're wasting your time. And I think it is so important to be connected to the people who you can say, who will bolster your belief that you're not crazy, because or else they're crazy like you're crazy.
Sure.
And that's the reason. That is, quite frankly, that's another reason I do the podcast, is because I want people to listen to stories of success, or even a success in progress.
Totally.
Right? I want people to hear encouraging stories and know that they're not alone. That's so important.
Yeah, because I think that it's like going back to kind of, sharing a little bit about my own background and my own history, understanding that we're both in this trajectory of a long line of ancestors who have created change and who fought for what's important for them.
Yeah.
And that we get to continue to lead that legacy and steward that along, as well as look to our left and our right? So thinking about both the timelining, but also kind of the field is really, really important. I think that when we look at history, when we look at kind of conflict, the best way that you can kind of encourage that is to say that we're different, right? And that you're the only person, and that you're not like anyone else. And so much of what we have to be doing is really understanding that we actually want to build a better world together. And it may look a little different, right? It may be a Coliseum in your city, right? It may be a running track in the neighborhood that I worked in. But that this opportunity to fight for the change that we believe in, that act of fighting, that act of saying, no, this is important, is actually essential towards moving all of us towards change and towards a better world. And so we can gain strength from our ancestors. We can know that our work is actually around this longer legacy, around generations that we haven't yet met. But we can also understand that there are folks to our left and our right, both within our own neighborhood and our own city, but also in our regions and our nation, and also globally.
You mentioned the ancestors and then people we haven't yet met, and it's like one of the things that so I'm writing a book, Champions of the Lost Causes, the book, and one of the things that I develop is I talk about the strength of a person who champions a cause is in their, and I'll use an analogy here, a broad stance. We have one foot in the past, and people say we stand on the shoulders of giants, and indeed that's true. But having respect for the past, that foot firmly planted in the past, means I don't want to squander the gains, the hard-won gains of the past, and so I respect that. And so I have one foot of my stance in the past, but one foot out in the future, for not just my children or maybe my grandchildren or people I might be able to kind of conceptualize, but in the distant other person who's going to live 500 or 1,000 years from now. Those people are going to need fresh fruits and vegetables. They're going to need clean air. They're going to need to be respected. They're going to need to give their all in support of a cause. So if a person who champions a cause which is absolutely the ioby project leader. Yeah. That is to the T. That's the definition. Is if I've got one foot in the past out of respect and one foot in the future out of concern, and my torso is here in the present. If someone shoves you and you have a broad stance, you're more able to stabilize yourself.
Totally.
And it's so I believe that in us having a respect for what came before us and a deep love for the future of humanity gives us a broad stance that allows us to withstand the air quotes shoves of the people who try to intimidate us or try to tell us that our work doesn't matter. It does matter. It sure as heck matters to the people who did come before us, who their hopes and dreams for us that we would have those opportunities. But also, we have a responsibility to the people who are going to live 500 or 1,000 years in the future. And I just think it gives us a strength in it just undergirds us with a deeper sense of commitment. I'm explaining it poorly, but I feel like. But then also the whole shoulder to shoulder thing that you say, those people in the present, we need the entire global family of people who champion causes, past, present, and future, to kind of realize those are our allies.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the fact that you backed up a step and talked about and connected it to your grandfather and your parents and stuff, because I really feel like it's like a ripple effect, right? Like you didn't just randomly become this leader at ioby at this time. You were the person who was formed with all these formative lessons, both the lessons of what you didn't have and all the things that you did have.
Sure.
And all that's added up to the person you are here, leading ioby. Isn't that crazy?
It's wild. It's wild. I will tell you, I very rarely think of myself as a person that leads ioby. I think of myself as a steward for the organization. And when I think about my role as a steward, I think about what are the ways in which I can strengthen this work and ensure that it is an organization, a collective, a group of folks that can continue to support each other in 5, 10, and 15 years. So saying that I'm a leader at ioby seems very odd to me, or a CEO. I don't think of myself as that. I think of myself as a steward. And so it goes back to this idea, if we think about the longevity of this work, what is my role in it now, right? How are we able to strengthen through improving the platform? How are we able to strengthen through connecting folks with each other, right? How are we able to strengthen through amplifying the voices of folks to folks who have money, like philanthropy and foundations, right? How can we think about strengthening through really stepping into our role as an intermediary between larger nonprofits, smaller nonprofits, philanthropy, space, place, and regions, right? All those things are really important in the work. And so as the steward of that, right, it makes me excited because it helps me understand that there's still a lot of work to do and there's so much that's been done, right?
Right.
And to feel a real sense of respect and honor to be able to be a part of that team and to be a part of the mutuality across the 3,700 leaders, right, that have moved $20 million on our platform is wild, right?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What an honor and a privilege. And what a cool job you have. I feel like all that ioby does is encouragement, and we all need every ounce of encouragement we can muster in this world, because there are plenty of voices who sell us probably a bunch of products that we don't need on the backs of this message that we're different people, that we're separate people, that there's a lot of division, but there's also so much good, and I need every opportunity to stay tethered to it. I consider it an incredible privilege to be able to do this podcast, because people have told me, I find your show so encouraging. You boil down to its essence a good thing that's going on in the world, or an encouraging trend. And I think to myself, I get the privilege to be the first person who's encouraged, because I'm literally the host. And I get to ask the questions. You mentioned 5, 10, 15, 20 years. What's the future look like for ioby looking out a little bit further? What's ioby going to be doing in 20 years? Like, dream big, wave a magic wand.
Wow. So dreaming big, right? One of the things that we do support on our platform is this opportunity to be a fiscal sponsor, right? Folks who are unincorporated groups may not necessarily want to be an incorporated group, and we're able to kind of
Y'all are my
support
fiscal
them.
sponsor on this podcast road trip.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would love to see what it would look like to actually have a fully tricked out fiscal sponsorship department. It's not sexy, right? But what that is that, like, that's the infrastructure and the road that we need, because what I'm understanding is that more and more, when folks want to step into their leadership, they actually don't really want to become 501c3s, right? And so understanding that that's where folks are at, and can we meet that need, that's something that I would be very excited about. I will tell you that as an intermediary, we often work and develop match programs, right? So we'll go to foundations or we'll go to donors and we'll say, if you're interested in Memphis or you're interested in health, any project that's on our platform, we will utilize your dollars and match it dollar for dollar.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Right? In 20 years, I would love ioby to have its own endowment, to actually have its own pot of money, to be able to give those dollars in places and spaces that may not necessarily get enough love, but actually have the projects that need to happen.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of work that happens to be an intermediary, right? We talked about this before, building relationships with philanthropy, building relationships with donors, right? Making sure that you're able to steward those funds, going back and actually having conversations with them. What would it look like if we had our own endowment? What would it look like if we could say, for example, in Memphis, we're seeing that there's a need around A, B, and C, right? And no funder is actually supporting that, but we're seeing these projects come up again and again. That must be a need. Let's actually utilize our dollars to match it so that we're able to accelerate that change in a way that folks really envision. You told me to dream big, so that's kind of the big piece around all of it. Yeah. And I think, long term, if you want to get really wild and crazy,
Let's go there.
I would love the projects that are on our platform, the leaders that we are able to support, actually inform policy change and government work, right? So right now, again, it's very similar. Government actually works in partnership with ioby in different spaces and places, right? Both as we serve as an intermediary, we utilize their match dollars. Sometimes government agencies utilize ioby as kind of case making for larger policy change.
Oh, okay.
And it really is government working with ioby and then projects coming up to the surface. But what would it look like if it were completely flipped around, right? What would it look like if we saw a trend around ioby leaders saying that X, Y, and Z things are coming up again and again in Memphis? Let's go to government and say, so here's the data that you need around the change that you're thinking needs to happen. Do you want to talk to them? Do you want to create policy together? Right? Like, that would actually be really amazing.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. You told me to dream big, so.
I have every confidence that we'll get there. I have every confidence. So as we wrap up here, is there any question maybe I didn't think to ask that you'd like to comment on? Both about ioby or anything else?
Yeah. Wow. I don't think so.
Okay.
I think we covered so much.
Good. So where can people go to learn more? And is there any closing thoughts you want to direct people to go check out?
So definitely ioby.org is the place to be, right? And at the end of July, beginning of August, we'll launch ioby Next, which we're very, very excited about.
Cool.
So you'll see a new and improved website, and you will also see a completely rebuilt platform. You can always follow myself at New Perspectives, NUPUR Perspectives, on Instagram. And then, of course, we have all of the handles in our backyards on Instagram, on LinkedIn, Facebook, all those places.
Sure.
I think the closing thoughts that I'll say is that things are hard right now. things are hard in this country, right?
That's true.
And it requires all of us to come together to think about things in new and different ways. And I would encourage people to step into their leadership, to think about that kernel of an idea, and to try and turn it into action, because that actually might be the idea that we've been waiting for.
I don't know how we ended any better than that. Nupur, thank you so much for being on Champions of the Lost Causes. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a pleasure.